Welcome to today's podcast. Today we have Dr. Cathy Stone joining us. Cathy is a consultant, a researcher focusing on student equity and student success within post-secondary education. She's also a conjoint associate professor at the University of Newcastle in Australia and is an adjunct research fellow with the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education at Curtin University. Cathy has been closely involved in the development and the provision of strategies to enhance student success in the higher education sector since 1994 and has a long-standing commitment to student equity, widening participation and improving the experience and outcomes for increasingly diverse student cohorts, both in the online and the on-campus environment. Cathy has a strong research background in the area of mature age, first in family and online students, and she was awarded an equity scholarship in 2016 by the NCSEHE, during which she investigated strategies that contribute to the access, participation and success of students in online undergraduate education. Cathy is a recipient of the Carrick Citation for Outstanding Contribution to Student Learning. She's a lifetime fellow and former president of the Australian and New Zealand Student Services Association, and has been co-editor at its professional journal, JANSA, since 2008. She's also accredited as a mental health social worker by the Australian Association of Social Workers. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you very much, Tanya.
I feel exhausted just reading all that out.
I know, I'm slightly embarrassed that there was so much to say. I probably should have cut it down a bit.
Oh, that's okay. The thing is, you come from a really broad range of experiences, and you have a lot of quality outcomes that you're producing in this area, which is one of the reasons why we really wanted to have you on board.
Thank you.
I know I personally get so much out of your research, particularly in the student equity and success area, and I know you do a lot of consulting work in this area too. So at the risk of oversimplifying what is a complex challenge, what would be perhaps the first three things that an individual or an organisation should consider if they want to improve student outcomes?
Yeah, sure. Look, that is a sort of complex question, but in a way there is a fairly simple answer to that. And I think that the key thing is just really about knowing who the students are. This is something I bung on about endlessly. Who are our students? And, let's really know who they are, because primarily they're no longer, the high school leaver. Yes, we still have plenty of those, but there is a very diverse cohort of students now at university, and that's thanks to widening participation. It's great that there is such a wider cohort. Unfortunately, though, it's often not well understood how diverse this cohort is. So often university policies and processes are still treating all students as if they're high school leavers, as if they're not adults with rich, busy lives, as if they're not, been working in the workforce for a long time, as if they're not also caring for families and aging parents. So we're talking about adult learners with very rich, full, busy lives a lot of the time in university now. They bring with them a lot of skills, a lot of strengths, which are often underestimated, often never asked about. And often what is seen by the institution is their lack of confidence or their lack of familiarity with academic language and academic expectations. So it's all too easy to adopt a deficit mode with this very diverse cohort. Oh, they can't do this, they can't do that. But there are so many things they can do. And I think that with sufficient encouragement, support, information, and asking them about themselves and getting them to contribute in really meaningful ways to class discussions and assessment tasks and so on from their own background of experience can make a huge difference. So I know that's kind of a bit pie in the sky, but I do think that's the crucial thing of, and a lot of university teaching staff are really good at this now, at really having a look at their cohort of students, saying, okay, who have I got here? And understanding that, okay, I've got quite a lot of mature age students here. I've got students from different cultural backgrounds and so on. And as you said before, a lot of my experience is with online as well as the face-to-face students. So that's harder in the online environment, and we'll get onto that in a minute. But I think, key point one, really try to get a grasp of who the students are. And that needs to be on an institution-wide basis. So I still, meet people working in universities who talk about their students as kids. And every time that staggers me, because I think, well, who are these kids they're talking about? But anyway, so that's the first thing.
And often the lecturer is younger than the students.
Absolutely. And I think, most lecturers are the first to acknowledge that the mature age students in that classroom setting contribute an enormous amount and are usually highly motivated, just very strong work ethic. And, they may struggle, as I say, with some of the academic expectations and so on, but their motivation is strong, and they're there for strong. Their motivation is strong because they're there often for very practical reasons. They want a better job. They want to be able to support their family. They want to move up to the next stage in their career. So they're very focused usually, and often coming from that very focused motivation, then that love of learning sometimes develops a bit later, that they get to university and they think, oh, wow, I thought I was just coming here to get a better job, but actually I really love this. And so it's great to see that happen, and that needs to be fostered and nurtured. But I suppose the second point is about communication. So, first of all, get a handle on who the students are, what is this cohort, how mixed is it, and what are they bringing with them, and what do they need. And the second point is about communication. And nowadays I think because they're not just all school leavers who are used to the teacher up the front of the class, communication is huge. So teacher to student, student to student, institution to student. And I think so much communication now is done digitally. It's almost all done digitally, really, except for face-to-face teaching when students are coming on campus. But all other communications from the institution are digital. So it needs to be personalised, targeted. It needs to be meaningful, relevant to them. So that it's about developing a sense of belonging. It's about feeling, okay, this institution or these staff, these people there, they know who I am. And that's great because I feel good about that, and I feel as if this is a place I want to belong to. So it is about building up that sense of belonging through communication, and the right sort of communication. So that would be the second point. And the third point I sort of alluded to in my first point really is about student processes and policies being appropriate for the needs of adult learners. So whoever the student is, the policies and processes need to be designed with a diverse cohort in mind. So, for instance, one of the things that sort of mature age students often come up against is quite rigid policies around assessment extensions and so on. A lot of regional students really struggle with this, having to get a stat deck signed by a JP or whoever, and they're finishing off an assessment, their kid's sick, or they're called into work for an extra shift that they can't afford to say no to. So it's going to put them back by a day or so, and they may only need a day or so. And I've had so many students say to me, look, I just want to be able to ring the lecturer up and say, can I just hand it in tomorrow? I'm nearly there, but I've had this happen. And an awful lot of lecturers, where they can, are fantastic about that and say, yeah, sure, that's fine, just get it to me as soon as you can. But sometimes they're working in a system themselves which is very rigid, and they're prevented from doing that by rigid policies and processes. So they say, look, I'm sorry, I'd like to be able to do that, but I actually have to have a medical certificate, which wastes more precious time by, going to the doctor to get a medical certificate for something that actually didn't need a doctor's visit. Anyway, that's just one little example, but there's been quite a lot written about this in terms of, there was a great paper by it's Greenland and Moore, or Moore and Greenland. Sometimes they write together a lot, and they wrote a great paper on employment-driven attrition amongst online students, in the sense that a lack of recognition by the institution that employment for these students has to come first. And I guess that's the thing about this diverse cohort. It's about a student understanding the student identity. Their identity is not going to be student first and foremost. It can't be for most of them. It's parent first, employee second, student third, or whatever it happens to be. So, you know, there are more pressing priorities, and while they would very often would love to be able to put their studies top of the list, they literally can't, because they have responsibilities for others, and they have responsibility to earn money in order to support others, and then their studies. So I guess it's, yeah, so they'd be the three things that I would say are really important.
Cool. And so based on your experience, I guess, and you talked a bit about in terms of processes and that, what are some of the biggest internal challenges that higher education providers need to address in order to, you know, be able to actually address those points?
Yeah. Look, I think one of the biggest internal challenges is that the very, you know, siloed nature of universities that we all are aware of, all talk about. And it's very hard sometimes for the, you know, the left hand to know what the right hand's doing. So students often get inundated with communication from all different areas, and you know, that can be good, but it can be really bad, because sometimes it's conflicting, and often it means that students just don't read their emails because they're getting stuff that's not relevant for them. So they miss the stuff that is relevant. So there does need to be, I mean, one of the things that I sort of talk about a lot is developing the collaboration and coordination across the university on an institution-wide basis, so that it's not different areas of the universities all doing their own thing. And look, that's a really hard one. The Open University in the UK came up with a very innovative approach to this, where they basically did an enormous restructure a few years ago, and they created these discipline-based teams where, for instance, what we might have now is like the School of Humanities and Social Science that I'm attached to at the University of Newcastle, that became like for example, the discipline team, say, for social science and humanities, but rather than it being just the academics, it also includes administrative support staff, library staff, technology staff, you know, learning designers, so that there's a genuine teamwork happening. And you know, the Open University has done this, I think, very successfully from visits that I've had there, where, just as an example, you know, the usual emails that go out saying, you know, it's assessment time, you know, if you need any help, contact this, that, and the other, which is great. Yeah. And that's often sent out centrally at a certain time of the semester, when, as a genuine attempt, it may be being sent out by a student retention and success team or something like that. What happens is that often the schools or faculties don't necessarily know that's going out. They may have been told, but it doesn't really register. They've got a lot of other things to think about. And it's not particularly targeted, whereas what they do at the Open University is, within their discipline-based teams, there's a university-wide intervention program in terms of their communications, but they're all tailored within the individual teams. So, for instance, if it's a biology discipline, then the email that will go out will say, now you're about to start and it's the particular assessment, you know, your assessment on this, and here are some pointers to, you know, to send you in the right direction for that. So it's just much more relevant and targeted. So one example that in horticulture that someone gave me at the Open University was, you know, it's time to grow your tomato seeds. So it's just very specific, and of course then it's just the student reads it and, oh, that's for me. It's not the generic, oh, here's, you know, assignments coming up and here's where to go for help. I'm not criticizing that by any means, because, you know, I've been involved in developing those sorts of messages because, you know, believe me, they're a lot better than nothing. But how much better is it if it's actually targeted so that within that team they know the students it's going out to, that the right message is going to the right group of students. And I'm not saying any of this is easy, and I'm not saying that every university suddenly needs to do a massive restructure, but there are other ways, you know, of approaching it. So, for instance, some universities now have got student advisors attached to particular schools, working within the schools alongside the academics at team meetings, at school meetings and so on. And I think that helps a lot. I know when I worked for many years in student support at the University of Newcastle, I was on a smallish campus, the Central Coast campus, and it made it possible for staff in our area to quite often go along to school meetings and so on. And that, you know, just that communication helped a lot. But we were a small campus, so it made it more possible. Whereas on large campuses, large universities, it can't operate that way just on people thinking proactively. It has to be embedded in systems and processes and structures. So I think that's a huge challenge for universities in terms of how to build a level of collaboration and coordination so that, you know, the faculty isn't sending out messages about this, and Central is sending out messages about that, and library sending out messages about other things, because that's when many students just turn off.
Yeah, and I think coming back to your earlier point about processes and policies, often the people that are setting those and designing those aren't actually facing the students. So they don't actually know.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and they're certainly not facing all the students. I mean, for instance, you know, my background's very much in student support, and we would see a lot of students.
Yeah.
But we were not seeing, you know, all by any means as many students as the teaching staff see. And for most students, their strongest link in a way is with the teaching staff. They're the ones they see or encounter online, whether they're face-to-face or online. So they're their connection point. And, you know, I often think it's really hard on the teaching staff, because if they're dedicated, motivated, which I know so many of them are, they spend an enormous amount of time, contact time with students, because the student goes to them for everything. And so to support the teaching staff as well is where we need that more coordinated, collaborative approach, so that the teaching staff have some backup, so that they're not having to deal with everything, but the student is going to go to them because that's the one they know. So, you know, in student support, we used to try and get a lot of messaging into, you know, lectures and so on about support services, but it's not the same as having it really embedded in a curriculum, or having, as I say, people working alongside each other, so that you can just say in the staff room, look, I've got this student who's coming to me every 5 minutes for this. What can we, you know, how can we help? How can we work together to help? And I often think that particularly sessional staff, and that came out a lot in the research I did, the Equity Fellowship research with the National Centre, a lot of staff who would teach online particularly are sessional staff. And, you know, they're really often on their own. And I think that's really hard. And so, you know, they're the ones supporting the students, and they need the support themselves from a more solid and supportive home base, back at a more coordinated approach from their university, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I know that in the past, a few years back, you were the Director of Student Success at Open Universities Australia. Yeah. So knowing that more of our non-traditional student cohorts are accessing their higher education experience online, what sort of strategies and different approaches to our student support programs do we need to consider for those online learners?
Well, look, online learners need everything I've already said.
Yeah, obviously.
Plus a bit more. and for the online learners, you know, that connection with their online tutor is just huge. So, you know, people who teach online will say repeatedly that it takes more of their time to teach online than face to face, because they're, and I mean, it makes sense. We all know it's slower to do something by text than it is to talk face to face. And because of the nature of online learning, or the nature of the online learning cohort, a lot of synchronous learning is not going to be great for many of the students. So like you and I are talking synchronously now, it's very easy. But if I were, you know, an online student, I'd be at work now. I wouldn't be able to be having an online tutorial like this. And so for a lot of students, the nature of the contact is obviously a lot harder. Many prefer it, and it can be done extremely well. But I think the extra thing that's needed with online, and certainly this came out of the research that I did through the National Centre, is that it's the relationship with the teacher or the tutor, and that's where that person needs to have that backup. But also the learning materials, they need to be relevant, meaningful. A lot of students use the word authentic. They're very quick, and because they're time poor, they're very quick to feel aggrieved or disengaged if they feel they're just being given what they describe as just busy work, just work to keep them busy without it being really relevant, authentic, meaningful to their particular area of study. So it's got to be quite streamlined, and the design needs to be designed for online. I met some fantastic learning designers and ed tech people in the research that I did, and I continue to meet them at conferences and so on, and talks that I do. And I have so much respect and admiration for them. And when they work closely together with the teaching staff, the results can be just fantastic, because they can really build into the design not a lack of need for the tutor, but they can build into the design a way in which the tutor does not have to be sort of like, you know, 24/7 present. So it's working together, again, that collaboration to create an online course that is specifically created for online, so that it's engaging, it breaks up the content, it keeps students at their computer, because let's face it, to sit at a laptop, I mean, I couldn't do it, sit at a laptop and watch a lecture for an hour and a half. You know, I'd be asleep, I think. So it's got to be done differently. So, and there's a lot of really good stuff happening like that now. When I was at Open Universities Australia, I guess the quality varied so much. And this was, you know, I'd hear this from the students, that students would say, oh, I loved that course, you know, because it was so interesting and the tutor was so fantastic. And we had all these great little videos and all these little exercises afterwards that made it relevant. Whereas, you know, they'd say, but on the other hand, this other subject is terrible because the lecture just puts up reams of notes. So, you know, it's I think one of the problems is that quite a lot of universities, through necessity, I guess, are teaching online and offline, online and face-to-face students at the same time. So the quickest and easiest way for them is to just record their lectures and put them online, or to invite students to attend the lecture synchronously. But neither of those is an ideal solution, because attending a lecture synchronously is very, very, very disengaging, really, especially if it's long. If it's a short lecture, you know, 15, 20 minutes, fine, but longer than that, it's very hard. Yeah. And then to watch it asynchronously, even worse, and even a whole set of PowerPoint slides, it's not engaging. So it's got to be active, it's got to be communicative, and again, the learning design can link students up more effectively with other students, and so I guess I come back to the importance of the teacher presence, which is vital in the online, and the online design of the actual course, and also the ongoing contact with the institution, because the interesting thing about Open Universities Australia was that obviously we were not, they were not studying with Open Universities Australia. They were enrolled through Open Universities Australia, but studying at all different universities. So their link with OUA was through the communication, the support that we would send out. And we did a lot of really interesting stuff there. I mean, we did phone call outs to all new students within the first 3 weeks of their study period. We had student coaches who could be, students could be referred to if they were struggling. And we had also, and I think this is something I wanted to mention as well, online modules to complement or supplement their learning. And again, these are probably better when they're embedded in the curriculum, when it's like, if you want to know more about this, click on this. We couldn't do that at OUA because we were not the teaching institution. But we had free online preparation modules. The University of Newcastle has also a really good academic survival skills. It's like a MOOC, which is great. So I think those sorts of things are really helpful too. But again, ideally, they're embedded in some way into the actual content that the students go onto for their real classes. Because, as I say, these are time poor students. Many of them will just do what they see as essential because they really feel they haven't got time for any more. But if they're encouraged through the curriculum to click onto something else that's going to help them, and it's got to be relevant, this is going to help you with your assessment, and they find it really enjoyable and interesting, then they're likely to do more of that as well. But it comes back to starting with that learning content. And I guess just the other thing I'd say is about the tutors. There's a really interesting paper written by, I've just got to look it up now. I've just got to make sure I get this right. But it's, where are we? It's by Andrea Dodo-Balu, Dodobalu, hyphenated. And she wrote this great paper called Students Thrive and Teachers Wither. And it's about the online experience. It's about, here we go, it's Students Flourish and Tutors Wither. That's it. And it's in the Australian Universities Review 2017. And it's really about how these very dedicated online tutors are really helping students to flourish, but they are withering themselves because they're not getting the support or the recognition from their own institutions. And I have seen that so much myself in talking to teaching staff, particularly sessional teaching staff. So that's I think that's a key thing for institutions to address, because they've got to support the staff who are actually the ones that the students are relying on. And of course, in the terms of the broader support services, they've got to be available, accessible by remotely, whether that's phone, online, both preferably, live chat and phone, certainly, and that applies to all the specialist counselling, mental health services. I mean, that's originally my background, and library services, further academic skills preparation that's extra to what hopefully would be embedded in the curriculum. So it's about making sure that it's not, in the words of one student that I interviewed from research, it's not an office hours gig. That's the way the student described it. So, we've got to get away from thinking this is an office hours gig. It's not. And that has huge ramifications for everyone who's supporting students. So I think, I could rave on all day about this, Tanya. But I'll take a breather there.
And that dovetails really nicely into my last question, which was, both for yourself and also for those of our listeners out there that are involved in actually designing these policies and these, schedules and things. How do we adapt our predominantly 9-to-5 mindset so that we can support these students? Because, as you say, they're not 9 to 5. 9 to 5 is when they're working. They're studying in those other times. How do we make sure we support them with the support services, not just the academic services?
Yeah, and look, I mean, that is happening in some universities really well, where they've got, after hours phone counselling services and so on, and live chat services. So I think it does require a major rethink. And, the default model is always the face-to-face on-campus daytime student. And we have to get past that. So we have to always be saying, what about the other students? What about the distance students? What about the online students? What about the student who's doing their work at 11 o'clock at night when the kids are in bed? What do we have for them? And if the answer is, well, we don't have much, then that's not going to work. Whereas if we do have something really for all those students, then everyone's needs are going to be met. And I'm not saying that you have to have, counsellors and academic skills staff and disability staff on duty 24/7, but maybe hours can be staggered. And maybe, as I say, some universities are sort of outsourcing an after-hours counselling service that they then have close liaison with. But we need to be thinking differently. I mean, we have the technology to do it, so it's not that difficult. And there's a lot of people, a lot of staff whose lives are not 9 to 5 either. So there's a lot of staff who have young kids as well. So some staff may be really happy to work evenings at home. I know when my kids were young and I was a university counsellor, I would have been more than, we didn't have the technology then, but I would have been more than happy to work, say, 7 till 10, each evening, 4 evenings a week or something like that. I think that we just need to get a bit more creative about this, so that we're, because at the moment it seems to be there's a lot of people working very, very long hours. So you've got someone who works a normal daytime shift trying to fit in a call to students late at night as well. And so they're getting a double load. Whereas, let's rethink this. Let's say, okay, what hours are we trying to cover? What staff do we have? How are we going to cover these hours? Do we need more staff? I think in terms of the student numbers, if you've got about the right balance of staff to students, and you may not, it's really just about getting that time frame right. But I'm not suggesting it's easy, but it's more about just constantly asking that question: have we got all our student base covered?
That sounds
Which
great.
Comes back to that first point of knowing who your student base is. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's been really great. There are all the questions I have. Is there anything that you'd like to share while we have you here, Cathy? Have you got any research that you're working on at the moment? Anything?
I'm sort of always working on something. But, lately, I've been doing a lot more work with looking at students transitioning to high school from regional high schools. So I did some work with the New South Wales Department of Education. That was through the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education. And now I'm about to begin work on a project with South Australian regional and remote high schools, looking at the barriers to their transition to university, which it's made a nice change for me, because I focused for so many years on primarily mature age students and then online students. And I mean, the issues for regional students are, they're similar but different. But again, it's about understanding that cohort. So, that's been a very nice change for me. I guess I'd want to emphasise with the online for people to know that these the report that I did for the National Centre on the Equity Fellowship on improving outcomes in online learning. That's quite, thanks to the 151 people I interviewed across the 16 institutions, it's quite a rich report, full of the wisdom of these experienced staff who are passionate about online students and helping them succeed. So I'd recommend that report to people if they're looking on the National Centre website.
I'll also add the link to the podcast notes too.
Great, thank you. And because there are very clear recommendations from that on ways to improve student outcomes in online learning. And I know that they've been picked up by a number of institutions who in the planning of changes to their online delivery or building their online delivery, which is great. And as I say, some of them might sound a bit idealistic, but it's something to aim towards. So I guess I'd want to focus on those. And my colleague Sarah O'Shea and I have just had a paper published in the Australian Journal of Educational Technology on gender equity in online, which was nice for me to get back to some of the sort of gender equity stuff that I talked about in my original doctoral thesis. So so they're the sorts of things I'm doing at the moment, and really enjoying it. And it's been great to have the opportunity to talk to you today, Tanya, and thank you for asking me.
Oh, it's been lovely having you here, Cathy. I've really enjoyed the chat, and it's given me all sorts of ideas as well for the things that I can do too. So hopefully it's been useful for everyone. So thank you again for coming.
So. That's my pleasure. Thanks very much. Okay.